2012 in Louisiana. Police officers Thomas and Maynard come to Marty and Rust to ask about a mysterious case that happened 17 years ago. Time goes back 17 years. At that time, Marty and Rust were members of the criminal investigation team. They were a couple of newly acquainted colleagues. The police discovered a strangely shaped female body under a fake tree. She was completely naked. Her hands are tied, and her eyes were blindfolded. Her whole body was in a kneeling position with multiple stab wounds in her abdomen and a spiral mark on her back. The highlight was that she was wearing a crown of deer antlers. Around the body were many spiral-shaped stands made of tree branches. Rust thought this was some kind of religious ritual. The sophisticated crime scene showed that this was not the first time the perpetrator had struck. He also discovered that the victim's lips had ulcers and her gums were sunken. He predicted that she might be a prostitute. The fingerprint results came back the next day. Her name was Lang, 28 years old. Lang had been a prostitute and had been arrested for drug possession. Lang's ex-husband was named Charlie. Charlie had been in prison for book forgery. When he was released from prison, they divorced. The autopsy showed that Lang had been sexually assaulted before she died. She had a virus and hallucinogens in her system. The cause of death was strangulation, but there were no fingerprints at the scene. Immediately, Lang's case became a headline in the local newspaper. The leader asked Marty and Rust to quickly solve the case. Then the two went to investigate the village near the crime scene. They accidentally heard an old man say that in the village there was a 10-year-old girl named Marie who had gone missing 5 years ago. They contacted a nearby church to ask for information about Marie. The priest said that Marie's parents had moved away 5 years ago. Rust showed the priest the strange racks at the scene. The priest said that it might be a sign of a religion called the Devil's Net, but he didn't know which religion. Then the two went to the village police station. They found a file about Marie. Marie's mother had reported her disappearance to the station, but the file had the wrong information. The police station chief was white. He explained that the person in charge of Marie's case at that time was a policeman named Terrence. Since Marie's parents were divorced, neither of them cared about her. That's why Terrence closed the case of Marie's disappearance. That year, a girl named Lena also went missing with Marie, but Lena returned after a day of being missing. The girl said that a blue-eared monster tried to take her into the forest. She escaped when the blue-eared monster left. The police station drew a portrait of the monster, according to Lena's words. The two looked at each other suspiciously. Then they went to Charlie, Lang's ex-husband, to ask him what had happened. Charlie said that the last time he had contacted Lang was a few months ago. Lang said that she was going to work as a nun at a church. There she met a king. Both were puzzled by Charlie's words. Back at the police station, the boss introduced Rust and Marty to a pastor named Tuttle. He was also the head of a charity organization. Tuttle's cousin was the governor of Louisiana. He was very interested in Lang's case. He hoped that Rust and Marty would solve the case soon. Before leaving, the boss warned Rust that if he did not solve the case soon, they would send people from elsewhere to form a task force, and Lang's case would be handed over to the task force. Rust's intuition told him that Marie's disappearance and Lang's death might be related. They then went to Marie's aunt and uncle's house. The aunt said she didn't know where Marie was, but Rust found an object in her house that was identical to the one at Lang's murder scene. This made Rust even more certain that two cases were related. They then took the stand away. Rust and Marty went to Lang's mother. She said that Lang had few friends. They last spoke a month ago. Lang said on the phone that she had been going to church often, but her mother didn't know which church. They then met Lang's friend again. Lang's friend also said that she liked going to church, but the friend didn't hear her mention the location of the church. The friend also said that Lang had worked for a short time near Spanish Lake a year ago. The two soon went near the lake. They learned from a girl that after Lang left his job, Lang had joined a church. Because Lang left in a hurry, she left her bag here and did not come back to get it. Rust discovered a diary in Lang's bag. The first page of the diary had a very strange sentence. I closed my eyes and saw a king in a yellow robe walking through the forest. This sentence was exactly the same as Lang's ex-husband's words. Charlie said that Lang said she wanted to go to the church to become a nun. She said that she met a king there. Rust found the king's name in the diary, Kakosa. There was also a recruitment poster from the church. The next day, Rust returned to Marie's village to investigate. Rust also took a picture of the villager's house, but he did not get any valuable clues. When he returned to the police station, the task force had arrived and was ready to replace Rust and Marty. Thanks to Marty's persuasion, their superiors decided to give them 2 more weeks. The next day, based on Lang's diary and the recruitment poster, they found the church that Lang had visited, but this church was now a ruin. Rust discovered a painting on the wall that resembled the pose of Lang's body. The figure's head was wearing a crown of deer antlers. Then they found a temporary church nearby. Pastor John said that the other church had burned to the ground. moved. In order to continue preaching, they built a temporary church. John said he worked under Pastor Tuttle, whom Rust had met at the police station before. Tuttle was the head of the charity project. He had invested in building a number of religious schools and churches. John often went to Tuttle's schools to preach. Marty asked who painted the painting on the wall. John said it might have been painted by someone in the congregation. Later, Marty learned from two female members that they had seen Lang fall from the church with a tall man. The man had a burn scar on his face, but they didn't know the man's name, so the church's trail was cut off again. Russ thought there must have been another victim like Long in the past 5 years. The next day, when Rust returned to the police station, he searched the archives, and finally, he found a case similar to Long's. The victim's name was Olivier, 22 years old. Her body was found in the river 4 years ago. Her hands and feet had strangulation marks, and her stomach had multiple stab wounds. She also had viruses and hallucinogenic drugs in her body. Most importantly, a spiral symbol was also found on her back. The police report said that Olivier died from falling into the water after taking drugs. Rust and Marty then went to see Olivier's grandfather. He said that before Olivier died, she had a boyfriend named Ledoux. He then gave Rust an album that Olivier left behind. Rust found out that Olivier had attended Madison High School, and this school was funded by Tuttle. They immediately went to the school and found that it was closed. There was a worker on the grounds. He said that he had only been hired to clean and knew nothing about the school. Marty then received news from his co-worker that Ledoux had been in prison for rape 6 months ago. But during his detention 2 months ago, Ledoux escaped. More importantly, during the time Ledoux was in prison, he and Charlie had been friends. Rust immediately asked the police to issue a citywide arrest warrant for Ledoux. When they returned to the police station, the police had also arrested Charlie. At first, Charlie refused to admit that he was involved in Long's death. Under pressure from Rust, Charlie confessed that he had shown Long's photo to Ledoux in prison. Rust asked what Ledoux had told Charlie in prison. Charlie said that Ledoux was going out to perform religious rituals with the rich, and this religion used women and children as sacrifices. There was a forest with an ancient stone field. The believers held sacrificial rituals at that stone field. Charlie also said that Ledoux had a spiral tattoo on his back. That was the symbol of this religion. Before Charlie left, he told them that a man named Tyrone might know where Ledoux was. They then met Tyrone's mother. She said that she had not seen her son Tyrone for half a year, but she gave them the address of Tyrone's girlfriend. Marty then followed Tyrone's girlfriend. Marty found Tyrone in a bar. Tyrone tells Marty that Ledoux is now dealing drugs for a motorcycle club. Ledoux used to be an undercover cop and had contact with club. Rust decides to disguise himself again to approach the club and find Ledoux. This time, he has to pretend to be a drug addict to clear their suspicions. He intentionally uses a syringe to stab his nose and arm. He also steals a bag of drugs from the police station. The next day, Rust brings the drugs to the motorcycle gang headquarters. Before Rust leaves, he gives Marty a phone. If the mission is successful, Rust will use the phone to inform Marty to arrest them. Not long after, Rust meets the third leader of the gang, Ginger. To test Ginger, Rust makes Rust snort some drugs. Then he shows his goods. Ginger tastes them and finds them to be of good quality. But Ginger says that the gang has no shortage of goods. They have a drug maker. The person Ginger is referring to is Ledoux. Ginger then took the boat to a private place. Ginger asked Rust to do him a favor tonight. Ginger would then introduce Ledoux to Rust. Rust immediately agreed. At this time, some of the group disguised themselves as police officers and went to some thugs' houses. Ginger began to take the thugs' drugs into bags. Rust immediately attacked Ginger and his gang. Meanwhile, Rust took the opportunity to call Marty to pick him up. Marty quickly drove to pick up Rust and Ginger. The next day, Ginger called Ledoux's cousin, Wooly. Wooly saw that Ginger was being threatened by Rust and immediately refused to cooperate with Rust. Wooly refused to take Rust to see Ledoux. After that, the two began to follow Wooly. Marty followed Wooly to a remote river, but he lost track of him. They saw Wooly's car parked by the river. The two opened the gate next to it and walked deep into the woods. On the way, they discovered that Ledoux and Wooly had set explosive traps. The evil rigs appeared densely. This further confirmed that Ledoux was nearby. Finally, after they crossed a small stream, they discovered Ledoux's drug lab. Rust told Marty to call for backup. Marty was worried that they would be discovered, so they went straight into the house. Ledoux was controlled because he did not react in time. Then, Marty went into another room. At that time, Wooly came out of the drug lab. Rust immediately pointed his gun at Wooly. But when Marty came out, he immediately shot Ledoux in the head. It turned out that Marty had seen two girls in tattered clothes locked in the house. At this time, Woolley ran away, but he accidentally stepped on his homemade explosive trap. He was blown to pieces everywhere. After that, the two girls were rescued. Rust and Marty also became heroes of the Louisiana State Police. However, Marty's wife left him. It turned out that during the investigation, Marty got drunk and spent the night at his female colleague's house. Soon, Marty and she both had new lovers. Time passed quickly to 2002. Rust, with his excellent interrogation skills, was invited by other police stations to interrogate drug dealer Deverlin. Very quickly, Rust used his eloquence to make Deverlin confess. But Deverlin made a proposal. If Rust agreed not to prosecute him, he would reveal a shocking secret. Of course, Rust refused to cooperate, but Deverlin's next words made Rust angry. Deverlin said they would never catch the real culprit of the Lange case. The killer was still at large and continued to kill. At that moment, the police rushed in and pulled Rust out. Only then did Rust realize that the real culprit of the serial killer had never been caught. Deverlin also mentioned a high-ranking official protecting the killer. Back in Louisiana, Rust told Marty that the serial killer had not been caught 7 years ago. Ledoux was just a member of a murder gang. Marty disagreed with Rust. Marty said that if the killer was still alive, he would have committed more crimes in the past 7 years. But there was no similar case. To persuade Marty, Rust should take him to the jail to meet Deverlin. But when they arrived, he was already dead. After checking the surveillance, they found that Deverlin had called his lawyer. Then, the police took him back to the cell. Not long after, blood started flowing from the cell. Rust immediately checked the lawyer's phone number. Through investigation, they found that the caller used a public phone and the location was very remote. Not like the actions of a normal lawyer. Rust suspected that Deverlin was threatened by someone. Marty still thought that Rust was making a big deal out of it, so he did not want to continue supporting Rust. Rust had to investigate himself. The next day, Rust went to the School of Medicine again. This time, Rust discovered many strange relics in the abandoned classroom. This made him suspect that the school was related to the serial murder case. The next day, Rust went to see Pastor John again. 7 years ago, when they investigated the Lange case, Rust went to see him. John once said that he worked for Pastor Tuttle. John has now resigned. The reason is that a few years ago, he discovered a dark secret at the school. One day, while cleaning the room of a senior pastor, he accidentally dropped a book. In the book were many photos of students. The students were lying neatly there. It was unclear whether they were unconscious or sleeping. These people were all students of the school. John immediately reported this incident to the founder of the school, Dieter. Dieter was very angry after seeing it. Dieter thought that John had taken those photos. John explained as much as he could, but he still couldn't get rid of his suspicions. He was forced to quit his job. Dieter also promised to investigate the matter thoroughly, but in the end, nothing came of it. John later learned that the high priest's name was Austin. Austin had a special relationship with Dieter. John also mentioned that in 1988, Dieter founded a school called the Shepherd's House. In 1990, the school was accused of priestly abuse and was forced to close. In 1992, Dieter re-established Bright Road School. Later, Rust went to the Rusnick Rehabilitation Center to interrogate a girl. This girl was one of the students that Rust and Marty had rescued from Emory. The girl was also a student at Bright Road School. Although rescued, the girl's spirit had not recovered after 7 years. She asked the girl if Rust had met any other bad guys besides the Emory brothers. The scarred man was the scariest. When mentioning this person, the girl became very emotional. This only made Rust more convinced that the serial killer had not yet been caught. The scarred man the girl mentioned could be the murderer. And last time, the two girls at the church also mentioned that Lange was taken away by a tall man with a scarred face. After returning to the police station, Rust recommends leadership to allow the investigation of the serial murder case from 7 years ago to be reopened. The leader asked if Rust had new evidence or new victims involved. Rust admitted that he currently had no direct evidence, but he affirmed in front of the leader that behind the murderer there must be someone big who was protecting him. 7 years ago, when Rust and Marty first started investigating, the superiors immediately sent a special task force to take over this case. Obviously, someone wanted to ignore this case and did not want the truth to be exposed. That high-ranking official might be the one behind this mass murder case. The leader thought that Rust was completely talking nonsense. It was all Rust's imagination. Even Rust's longtime colleague Marty thought that Rust was talking nonsense. Before leaving, the leader warned Rust that if he continued to talk nonsense, he would be fired immediately. Then, Rust went to Dieter, the founder of the school, and asked Dieter to provide some school documents, including a list of the principal, priests, and students. Dieter said that the charity school program had stopped long ago, and many documents were destroyed in a big flood a few years ago. Rust continued to ask about the high-ranking priest, but the man said that he had died in a car accident because he was drunk. The man asked Rust why he was investigating this. Rust said that he was investigating a mass murder case. In the end, Rust left empty-handed. But as soon as Rust returned to the police station, he was suspended from work. The reason was that Dieter called the police station to complain that Rust was harassing him without basis. The leadership chose to trust a priest rather than trust his subordinates. Rust could not bear to work under such leadership. Rust angrily submitted his resignation. That day, while Marty was taking a shower, Selena secretly looked at his phone. Sure enough, she saw evidence of her husband's infidelity again. But this time, Selena did not argue with him. She even calmly read a book in front of her husband. The next night, to get back at Marty, Selena took a bottle of wine and went to Rust. Finally, with Selena's initiative, the two had a passionate night. Selena thanked Rust for helping her with a big favor. Only then did Rust realize that he had been taken advantage of. The next night, Selena told her husband that she had seen the video on his phone. It was filmed very professionally. His lover was also very young, but Rust was a million times better than him. After hearing that, Marty was so angry that he wanted to strangle Selena. They finally divorced. The next day, when Rust went to the police station to file for resignation, Marty and he had a fist fight right in front of the police station gate. From then on, they became sworn enemies. Not long after, Marty also resigned from the police investigation. It turns out that those actions were the imagination of Marty and Rust. Back to the present time in 2012. The reason the police called Rust in for questioning was because Thomas and Maynard encountered a strange case. The victim's name was Fanny. In 2010, her body was found near Lake Sackley. The body was exactly the same as Lange's case in 1995. She was hung by many ropes on Lake Sackley. Her head was wearing a crown of deer antlers. 2 years have passed, but the case has not been solved. They believe that this case is related to Lange's death 17 years ago, so they asked Rust to recall the clues he found while investigating the case. After Rust looked at the crime scene photos, he also concluded that Fanny's death was the work of a serial killer. Maynard asked Rust why they didn't catch the real killer back then. This question made Rust angry. Rust immediately left. Then they went to Marty to ask. Marty said that when Rust caught Ledoux, they thought the case was over and didn't continue investigating. He didn't know what other clues Rust found. At this point, Maynard and Thomas changed the subject and said that the real reason they were looking for Marty was because they suspected Rust might be involved in the serial killer case. Marty was stunned when he heard this. Then they asked Marty if when they worked together to solve the case 17 years ago, Rust was the one who directed it and he was just cooperating. Marty admitted that it was thanks to Rust's deduction and investigation that they caught Ledoux. They continued to ask Marty if Rust was the one who suggested that killer had not been caught. Marty replied that he was. They then showed Marty photos of the crime scene at Fanny's. Rust's picture appeared in it, so the police suspected that Rust might be the one behind the serial killings. Although Marty and Rust had fought over women, he still believed that Rust was an upright cop. Marty got up and left police station, telling the officers not to call him about Rust again. They then went to Selena to talk. Selena said that, other than Rust's drinking habit, he was almost perfect in every other way. Selena also believed that Rust had nothing to do with killer. A week later, Marty was driving on the highway when he noticed someone following him. Marty immediately stopped the car on the side of the road. The person following Marty was Rust. They then went to a bar. Rust said that the serial killer from 17 years ago had resurfaced. It was time for them to close the case. Marty thought Rust was just drunk, so he said they had quit being a police detective for 10 years. How could they close the case? Rust said that even though he was an alcoholic, he still felt guilty because he had not caught the killer back then. After Rust quit being a detective, he went back to his hometown and fished for 8 years. He drank 35,000 bottles of beer. Until one day in 2010, when Rust saw the news about Fanny's murder on TV, he was motivated to solve the case again. So Rust returned to Louisiana. In 2 years, he had collected a lot of evidence. Now, Rust hoped Marty could cooperate with him to catch the real killer. Marty thought Rust was daydreaming. Marty tells Rust that the police now suspect him of being the culprit. Rust explains that he only came to the scene to investigate the case. Rust also mocks that the police nowadays never take the time to study how to catch criminals. Although Rust sincerely invites Marty, he still coldly replies that if Rust were starving, he would throw Rust a barbell to help Rust drown. Marty then stands up to leave. Rust calls Marty a coward. Rust says that Marty owed him 17 years ago and has a responsibility to pay. Rust implies that the day they caught Ledoux, Marty shot Ledoux in a fit of anger. If Marty had not been so angry at that time, they could have taken Ledoux to the police station. Then Rust could have exploited the real mastermind. That way, there would have been no new victims. Marty can't stand Rust's sarcasm and decides to investigate with Rust again. Then, Rust leads Marty to his secret vault, where many clues about the serial murder are kept. In the past 2 years, Rust has discovered that Tuttle has opened 14 schools in Louisiana since 1988. The disappearance rate within a 10-mile radius of these schools is twice as high as in other areas. What is even more frightening is that most of the women and children who have been murdered have attended Tuttle-sponsored schools. The list includes Marie and Lena, who disappeared in 1990, Lang, who was murdered in 1995, two girls rescued from Emory, and Fanny, who was murdered in 2010. Except for the two girls abused by Emory, it is likely that the others were murdered by the man with the scar on his face. The man behind this murder is most likely Tuttle's cousin, Walter, who is currently the governor of Louisiana. This is also the reason why so many people have been brutally murdered over the past 20 years, but the perpetrators have always escaped justice. Rust sought Marty's help because he had good relationships with people and could ask for help from people in the police department. In addition, Marty also owns a private detective agency. Rust hoped that Marty could help him look up the background of Walter, Tuttle, Emory, the man with the scar, and other related people. Hearing this, Marty thought Rust was just drunk. Because Marty had not yet seen direct evidence of the crime from these people, Marty thought that it was just Rust's speculation. In order to gain Marty's trust, Rust had to make the final move. Rust took out a pile of photos of missing girls being held captive. These were the photos that Rust had mixed up from Tuttle's mansion. Next, Rust played a videotape that showed a girl being raped by a group of masked men. They then took the girl's body to the funeral. That girl was Marie, who had disappeared in 1990. After watching, Marty was deeply moved. This time, he really believed Rust. However, not long after Rust mixed up the evidence from Tuttle's house, he died mysteriously at his home. Marty thought that Rust had killed Tuttle, but Rust thought it was a sacrifice to protect the person behind it. Tuttle knew that the evidence had been taken, but he did not report it to the police. It showed that he felt guilty. After Tuttle's death, the police did not investigate thoroughly, possibly because of some force. The next day, Rust hid all the evidence at Marty's company because he was worried that the police might raid his warehouse. Later, Marty went to the police station to give his boss a bottle of good wine. The boss agreed to let Marty into the archives to look up documents. Marty discovered that after Wallace died from the bomb, all of his assets were transferred to his relative, Julius. Julius said that since Wallace had no other relatives, the assets were transferred to him. However, Julius was not close to Wallace because Wallace often did illegal things. Rust asked Julius if Julius had ever seen anyone with a scar on his face next to Wallace. Julius said that he had seen him many years ago, but he only knew that the man with the scar was a little older than him. He did not know any other details. Then they went to the house of a maid who had worked for the Santori family for 19 years. Marty found in the records that she had served the family for many years. Santori was the father of Pastor Tuttle. Rust asked her if she had ever seen a boy with a scar on his face in the Santori house. She said that Santori had a nephew with a scar on his face, but she did not remember the man's name. Julius then took out a model of the devil's net and asked if she knew what a keksaxa was. Seeing the sacrifice seemed to bring back memories of past, she became extremely agitated. She muttered religious incantations. Her niece immediately chased the two out of the house. At this point, all leads seemed to have been exhausted. The two decided to look for clues from Marie's disappearance. In 1995, Sheriff Y had said that Sheriff Terry's was in charge of Marie's disappearance. Marty then met Y again to ask more about Marie's disappearance, but Marty realized that his words this time were completely different. Y was clearly lying. The next day, the two took Y to a deserted place. They took his gun and forced him to watch a videotape of Marie being raped and murdered. Perhaps the videotape awakened Y's conscience. Y confessed that Marie had indeed been kidnapped that year. Marie's kidnapper was a relative of Chief Terry's, so Terry's gave false information. Y said that he was not a bystander that year. He did not intentionally hide Rust and his teammates. In fact, there were superiors who helped Terry's cover up the incident. Y was just following orders to keep his job. Currently, Y does not know where Terry's and his relatives are. Rust believes that this time, Y is not lying. Before leaving, they warned Y not to report to the police. To warn Y, Rust hired a sniper to blow up his car. This sniper's name is Ken, a veteran and a bar owner. Ken had a daughter who went missing in 1988 from Tuttle's school, and she has not been found, so he was willing to help Rust. When they returned, the case was deadlocked again because they had no information about Terry's or William. Rust thought they needed to change their approach to the investigation. This seemed to hit Marty. Why green ears? Suppose that was who they were looking for. Why did Lena say the freak had green ears? Marty speculated that the killer could be a painter. Maybe he had some green paint on his ears by accident. In 1995, when Rust was investigating, he took pictures of a house in the village. At that time, painting houses green was popular in the village. Then they found the owner of that house. The old woman told Marty that the person who painted her house was a tall man with a scar on his face. Because the scar was quite prominent, she remembered it very well. She used to work at the church, and this painter also had connections with the church, so she paid him quite a bit. Rust then asked the name of her husband's company that had paid for the painting service for $265. The creditor was the Ritz Family Repair Company. The company owner was Bill Ritz, William's father. Santori had two sons. One was named Lito, the other was Bill Ritz. These two formed two families. One was the Lito family, the other was the Ritz family. The repair company had a partnership with the school and church founded by Lito. This confirmed the old woman's words. William probably approached the victims while working at the school. He then took the opportunity to lure them into the woods and harm them. Rust asked Marty to look up Bill Ritz's son, William, whom the two of them had been searching for the past 17 years. The next day, Rust made several copies of all the evidence of the serial killers. Rust gave them to Khan and told him to send the evidence to the media and the police if he did not hear from Rust within 20 hours. Then the two of them drove to William's place. When they arrived, Rust found that William's house was surrounded by woods. Rust asks Marty to call the police, but there is no signal here, so the two are forced to act independently again. Marty goes up to knock on the door and pretends to borrow the phone. Rust stands outside to guard. Immediately, a mentally unstable woman opens the door for Marty. She says there is no phone in the house. Marty asks if Bill Ritz is home, but she warns Marty to leave immediately. After saying that, she is about to close the door. At this moment, a black dog jumps out and runs towards the house opposite. Rust immediately chases after it and finds the dog's body behind the house. When Rust turns back, he sees William standing nearby. William leads Rust into the deep woods. Meanwhile, Marty rushes into William's house and finds it full of books and children's toys. The woman says her brother is a perverted killer. If Marty doesn't leave, he will die. Marty then found an old man locked in another room. It was William's father, Bill Ritz. Marty realized that Rust was in danger, so he left. Rust was led into the deep forest and got lost in a maze. Along the way, Rust saw countless sacrifices and dried corpses. This was the place where Marie and many other victims were harmed. Then Rust went to a deep hole. The strange environment made him start to hallucinate. While Rust was in a daze, William suddenly rushed over. Rust endured the pain and hit William hard on the nose. William finally threw Rust to the ground. At this time, Marty came and shot William repeatedly, but Marty himself was also hit by William's axe. William pulled out his axe and prepared to attack Marty again. Rust promptly fired and knocked William down. Immediately after, the police arrived and surrounded the area. It turned out that Marty had forced the woman to call the police. Then the police fired several flares into the sky. The light tore through the night sky. This gave the two of them hope of survival. Eventually, thanks to Marty's cries for help, police found and rescued them. The police then dug around William's house and discovered 10 skeletons. These were all missing people from schools and churches. One thing that needs to be explained is that Litho founded schools and churches and also founded a secret cult. The three families, Theo, Ledoux, and Reese, were all members of the cult. This cult worshipped a god named Kakosa, who was described as the Yellow King. In fact, he was an evil demon. The spiral and the demonic net were the signs of the cult. People like Lang, the maid, and Chockley all mention this king. Most of the adult victims were brainwashed before being murdered, so there were no traces of self-defense on their bodies. Chockley once mentioned a stone circle, which was the place where Rust and William had a duel. That's where the story ended. Finally, Rust woke up after a long coma. When he saw the news, he firmly said that culprit was still at large. Hearing that, Marty turned around and was about to leave because he didn't want to get into trouble again. But Rust didn't intend to stop there. The movie ended here. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you again.